I was just here for the lobster. Instead, I ended up with a wife. It was Labor Day weekend, and I, Adrian Cross, founder of a moderately successful tech startup and a man who considered himself reasonably smart, was sitting in a lavish hotel ballroom focused on dismantling the overpriced crustacean on my plate. Technically, the bride was some distant cousin on my mom's side. The relationship was so convoluted I had to check the Notes app on my phone just to remember the couple's names. My only reason for being here was to get my mom off my back and to see if the check I wrote for the wedding gift was worth the 5-star catering. The room was buzzing with energy. The giant, tacky floral arrangements were making my eyes water, and I had just popped a piece of buttery lobster into my mouth when the wedding MC on stage tapped his microphone. His testing 1, 2 had a tremor in it you could feel even over the air conditioning. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family," he began, his voice cracking with obvious nervousness. "We seem to be experiencing a minor unforeseen technical difficulty." I looked up from my plate. The guy's forehead was gleaming with sweat. Technical difficulty. Did the Wi-Fi go out? The microphone batteries die? The chatter in the ballroom slowly faded as hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto the stage. The MC's smile was so forced it looked painful, like someone was pulling his cheeks back with fishing wire. "Our groom, Mr. Marcus Blackwell, due to some, extremely urgent and unavoidable personal matters, is temporarily unable to join us." The room exploded into chaos. "What does that mean?" The groom bolted. "Is this a joke? The Sterling family is going to be a laughingstock." I knew that Marcus guy was sketchy. Too much hair gel. The woman at my table, a gossip connoisseur who'd been cataloging drama all evening, leaned in and whispered excitedly, "See, Adrian. Major drama. That gift check was totally worth it." I ignored her, my eyes drifting past the crowd to the side of the stage. An older man in a sharp tuxedo, his hair silver white and distinguished, was clutching his chest and swaying on his feet. A few people rushed to steady him before he collapsed. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Sterling, the patriarch of the family, a legend in the Chicago business world. Right now, the blood had drained from his weathered face, leaving only humiliation and a barely contained rage that made his hands tremble. Suddenly, the lobster in my stomach felt like a lead weight. The gossip wasn't just juicy anymore. It was radioactive, toxic, destructive. The situation spiraled into absolute chaos within seconds. The whispers of the guests became a tidal wave of judgment, each word a slap in the face to the Sterling family. The bride's mother was already crying into a napkin, her mascara running in dark streams down her cheeks. Mr. Sterling leaned heavily on a table, his lips trembling, unable to form coherent words. My mom appeared out of nowhere and smacked me on the back with surprising force. "Adrian, look at them. It's just awful," she said, her voice thick with sympathy. I nodded silently. What had started as a beautiful wedding had just become the city's juiciest scandal, the kind that would be discussed in country clubs and boardrooms for months. "You know," my mom added, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "Mr. Sterling used to play chess with your grandpa back in the day. He held you when you were a baby, bought you candy." I blinked in surprise. That was news to me. I had absolutely no memory of that connection. "Go on, go say something," she urged, giving me a firm shove toward the chaos. "See if he's okay." I stumbled forward, right into the orbit of the head table where the Sterling family sat in various states of shock and distress. Mr. Sterling's eyes met mine across the devastated space. They were a mix of desperation, pleading, and a last shred of his dignity hanging by a thread. He looked like he was searching for something, anything to salvage the wreckage of the day. And there I was, 6 feet 1 inch tall, in a decent suit, standing right in front of him like a complete idiot with no plan whatsoever. "Young man," Mr. Sterling started, his voice a dry rasp, as if I were a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The surrounding relatives, including my great-uncle Frank who lived for this kind of family drama, started chiming in with increasingly desperate suggestions. "That's right, someone needs to do something. You can't let him get away with this. The bride is such a wonderful girl. How can anyone do this to her?" Then someone, probably fueled by the open bar and too much champagne, yelled out, "Just find another decent guy. This wedding has to happen today. Can't let that jerk win." The words were like a spark in a tinderbox, igniting something dangerous and uncontrollable. And then every single eye in that massive room landed squarely on me, the only unmarried man of appropriate age standing within reach of the catastrophe. What was I thinking in that moment? I honestly have no idea. All I saw were Mr. Sterling's clouded eyes, the same desperate look my grandpa had when he was sick in his final days. Something inside my head just snapped completely. A surge of some long-dormant heroic instinct flooded my brain, washing away every ounce of common sense I'd ever possessed. I took a decisive step forward, snatched the microphone from the stunned MC's trembling hands, and roared into it with surprising confidence, "He won't marry her. I will. The wedding is back on." My voice, amplified by the speakers, echoed through the massive ballroom with the finality of a guillotine blade dropping. There was complete silence for 3 full seconds. Even the humming of the industrial-grade air conditioning seemed to die down to nothing. Hundreds of eyes stared at me in absolute shock, their expressions shifting rapidly from disbelief to confusion and finally to a bizarre, cautious hope. My mom's jaw dropped open, and a handful of cocktail nuts she'd been holding scattered at her feet. My great-uncle Frank's eyes were as wide as saucers. Mr. Sterling just stared at me, his trembling hands suddenly still, frozen in midair. And in that crystalline moment of clarity, I regretted absolutely everything. It took exactly 3 seconds for reality to crash down on me like a bucket of ice water. The heroic rush vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. I'll marry her. Marry who, exactly? I didn't even know what the bride looked like. I was just here to eat expensive food and leave. I clutched the microphone with white knuckles, desperately wanting to say something, anything. Just kidding, folks, would be good right about now, maybe try to lighten the catastrophically awkward mood. But then I saw the flicker of genuine hope returning to Mr. Sterling's devastated eyes, and the words caught and died in my throat. The MC was the first person to recover from the shock. He grabbed the microphone back from my hands like it was a life raft in stormy seas, his voice nearly breaking with overwhelming emotion. Yes. Yes. Now that's a real man right there. Let's give a huge round of applause for our new groom, Mr. Adrian Cross. The applause that erupted was absolutely deafening. Not a polite, scattered clapping, but a thunderous, roaring ovation that shook the chandeliers, like I had just single-handedly stopped an alien invasion or cured cancer. In the middle of the frenzy, a couple of burly guys who looked like off-duty bodyguards materialized on either side of me, half guiding and half hauling me onto the main stage. I shot a desperate, pleading look back at my mom, silently begging her to rescue me from this insanity. She gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up, mouthing the words with obvious pride, "That's my boy." I had just sold myself into matrimonial slavery to a complete stranger, and my own mother was celebrating. The next hour passed in a complete blur, like a fever dream I couldn't wake up from. I was a puppet, and someone else was pulling all the strings with ruthless efficiency. The MC whispered the ceremony steps into my ear at what felt like 1,000,000 miles an hour. I didn't hear a single word of it. They squeezed me into a tuxedo that was clearly meant for someone else, the shoulders too tight and the sleeves too short. Someone pinned a ridiculously large red flower to the lapel that made me look like a walking garden display. Mr. Sterling gripped my hand with surprising strength, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. Good boy, he kept repeating like a mantra. The Sterling family owes you more than we can ever repay. I forced what I hoped was a reassuring smile onto my frozen face. Happy to help, sir. Really, happy to help. Happy? My ass. My brain was stuck in an endless loop of existential questions. Who am I? Where am I? What the hell am I actually doing? This couldn't be real life. I was Adrian Cross, 28 years old, owner of a growing tech company called Velocity Dynamics, a guy whose longest romantic relationship had lasted exactly 6 months before imploding. And today, at a distant cousin's wedding I'd barely wanted to attend, I'd somehow gotten myself married to a complete stranger. My friends would roast me mercilessly over this for the rest of my natural life. The real panic set in hard when I started thinking practically. What happens next? When this circus is all over, do I go back to my apartment or to hers? How do I even begin to explain this situation to my brand new, completely unknown wife? Hey, nice to meet you, I'm your emergency replacement husband. Don't worry, this is all just for show. We can get it annulled tomorrow morning. She'd probably call the police and have me arrested for being criminally insane. But it was far too late to back out now. I couldn't become the second groom to run out on this wedding in the same day. Mr. Sterling looked like he was one more piece of bad news away from a fatal cardiac event. I had to see this ridiculous play through to its bitter end, no matter the consequences. And now, the MC announced with renewed enthusiasm, "Let's give a warm welcome to our beautiful bride." The classic wedding march began to play through the sound system. I turned stiffly, my neck creaking with tension, and looked toward the back of the ballroom where the massive doors were slowly swinging open. A figure in a stunning white gown appeared in the doorway, flanked by two bridesmaids in matching lavender dresses. A thick, ornate veil obscured her face completely, but her posture was absolutely incredible. She was tall and slender, and she walked with a steady, confident gait that seemed completely at odds with the situation. It looked less like a romantic walk down the aisle and more like she was heading into a hostile corporate takeover meeting. Damn, I thought with genuine admiration. This girl has ice water in her veins. Jilted at the altar 1 minute, and the next she's calmly walking toward a complete stranger replacement groom like it's a normal Tuesday. Mr. Sterling took her arm gently and led her toward me down the long aisle. The walk wasn't particularly long in terms of actual distance, but it felt like they were traveling from another continent, each step taking an eternity. Finally, after what felt like hours, he placed her small hand carefully in mine. Her skin was cold to the touch, and I could feel a faint tremor running through her fingertips despite her outward composure. Okay, so not ice after all. She was holding it together by a thread, just like the rest of them, barely maintaining control. A weird, unexpected wave of protectiveness washed over me. I gave her hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze, trying to communicate that we were in this together. She flinched slightly at the contact, then squeezed back with surprising strength, like a drowning person grabbing desperately onto a piece of driftwood. Mr. Sterling leaned in close, whispering so only the three of us could hear over the music, "Adrian, this is my daughter, Victoria. Please, I'm begging you, take care of her." Victoria. The name sounded strangely familiar, tickling something in the back of my mind, but before I could place it, the MC launched enthusiastically into the traditional vows. "Adrian Cross, do you take this beautiful woman, Victoria Sterling, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" My brain was producing nothing but white noise and static. "I do," I managed to croak out somehow. "Victoria Sterling, do you take this handsome man, Adrian Cross, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" Complete silence followed the question. A full 2 seconds of absolutely nothing. My heart hammered painfully against my ribs. Oh God, please don't say no. Please don't let this whole elaborate charade collapse right here at the finish line. Finally, a cool, slightly hoarse female voice whispered from beneath the veil, "I do." Rings were hastily exchanged, neither of us having a clue whose rings they actually were. Then came the moment I'd been dreading since stepping onto this stage. "You may now kiss the bride," the MC boomed with theatrical enthusiasm. I froze solid, every muscle in my body locking up. Seriously? This was definitely not in the emergency groom job description I'd never signed up for. The crowd was cheering wildly, whistling and clapping. I looked at the veiled woman standing before me, feeling completely trapped in an impossible situation. Kissing her felt like assault. We were total strangers who'd never even seen each other's faces. Not kissing her would make this whole elaborate performance look like an obvious sham, and all of this would have been for nothing. In the half-second I hesitated, frozen with indecision, she took matters into her own hands. She stepped forward decisively and, through the veil, quickly brushed her lips against my cheek in the lightest possible contact. It was featherlight, over in an instant, leaving only the sensation of soft skin and the faint scent of expensive perfume. The crowd erupted in absolutely wild celebration, as if they'd just witnessed the romance of the century. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, my shoulders sagging with relief. A new sense of admiration for my temporary wife bloomed unexpectedly in my chest. Quick thinking, high emotional intelligence, and grace under impossible pressure. The rest of the reception passed in a haze of autopilot actions. I smiled until my face hurt, shook hundreds of hands, and clinked glasses with an endless parade of strangers whose names I immediately forgot. My new bride, Victoria, remained on my arm the entire time, playing her part with absolute perfection. She didn't say a single word to me, maintaining her mysterious silence, but she played the role of the blushing bride flawlessly. "The groom is a lucky man, getting our family's princess," someone slurred drunkenly into my ear. "Talk about marrying up," another person muttered with obvious envy. The words bounced off me like rain on glass. The whole surreal thing felt like a fever dream, completely disconnected from reality. Finally, mercifully, the last guest departed into the night. My legs felt like jelly, barely able to support my weight. A man who looked like a professional butler approached us with perfect posture. "Mr. Cross," he said with respectful formality, "the suite is ready. Allow me to show you and Miss Sterling upstairs." Mr. Cross. Right. That was me now. My jaw twitched involuntarily as I followed him into the VIP elevator, Victoria still attached to my arm. The three of us stood in suffocating, awkward silence as the elevator climbed smoothly upward. I cleared my throat nervously. "So, today was pretty unexpected, huh?" She said absolutely nothing in response. "Look, don't worry about anything," I tried again, forcing my voice to sound calm and reassuring. "I'm not a bad guy, I promise. Tomorrow morning, we can sit down like adults and figure this all out rationally." Still complete silence, not even an acknowledgement that she'd heard me. Fine. I shut up, accepting defeat, and stared at the ascending floor numbers instead. The elevator dinged softly, opening onto an opulent penthouse floor with thick carpeting and gilded mirrors. The butler led us to the presidential suite at the end of the hall, handed me a key card with a slight bow, and said formally, "Mr. Cross, Miss Sterling, I wish you both a pleasant evening." He bowed again and vanished silently down the hall, leaving us completely alone. It was just the two of us now. The thin plastic key card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my sweaty palm. I took a deep, steadying breath and swiped it through the lock. The door clicked open with mechanical precision. The air inside the suite smelled overwhelmingly of champagne, roses, and obscene amounts of money. The suite was absolutely massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a glittering panorama of the entire Chicago skyline lit up against the night. In the center of the enormous living area, on plush white carpet, sat an obscenely large circular bed lavishly sprinkled with red rose petals. The scene was perfectly set for romance. Too bad the actors were completely wrong for the roles. I shut the door firmly behind us and turned to face Victoria, who was still wearing that mysterious veil. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. "Hey, you can have a seat if you want," I said awkwardly, gesturing toward an expensive-looking leather sofa. "Would you like some water or something?" She didn't move an inch. Just stood there motionless by the door like a statue. Okay, I guess it was entirely up to me to navigate this disaster. "Miss Sterling," I began, trying desperately to sound sincere and non-threatening, "I know today was absolutely insane, and you must be completely overwhelmed by everything. I promise you, I have absolutely no ulterior motives here. I just saw your father looking so devastated, and I acted on pure impulse without thinking." I took another careful step closer. "My name is Adrian Cross. I run a small tech company called Velocity Dynamics. Tomorrow morning, we'll explain everything to both our families, come up with a plausible story that makes sense, and dissolve this arrangement as quickly and quietly as possible. I'll make absolutely sure your reputation isn't negatively affected by any of this. You have my word." I waited hopefully for some kind of response. Nothing. Not a word, not even a slight movement. Was she in shock? Having some kind of breakdown? "Hey, are you okay?" I asked with genuine concern, inching slightly closer. "Should I call someone?" She finally moved for the first time since entering the room. Slowly, deliberately, she raised both hands and lifted the veil away from her face. It fell away in a cascade of white fabric, revealing the face that had been hidden beneath. A face I knew all too well, unfortunately. Even under the flawless professional makeup, I could see the cold, sharp intelligence burning in her eyes. The high, aristocratic cheekbones. The perfectly straight nose. The full lips pressed into a thin, hard line with a natural curve at the corners that always looked like a condescending smirk designed to make people feel inferior. I would recognize that face absolutely anywhere, unfortunately. For the past 3 years, it had haunted my professional nightmares and featured prominently in my stress dreams. It had graced the covers of business magazines with headlines like, "The Woman Reshaping Tech." It had stared me down coldly from across negotiating tables at bidding wars for multi-million-dollar contracts that determined the fate of companies. Victoria Sterling, Vice President of Summit Enterprises, known throughout the entire industry as the Ice Queen. My biggest business rival, the sharpest thorn in my side, the woman I despised with genuine passion. Just last month, she had used a predatory lowball strategy to snatch a massive project I'd been chasing desperately for half a year, nearly bankrupting my company in the process and forcing me to lay off good people. The woman I had just heroically saved, risked everything for, was her. My brain completely shut down. Blue screen of death. Complete system failure. Then a stampede of thoughts crashed through simultaneously. I married my arch-nemesis. I held her hand and promised her father I would take care of her. I actually felt sorry for her, thought she was some poor, helpless damsel in distress. She stared back at me with equal shock, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to recognition and finally settling into a look of profound, icy derision. The kind of look you give a particularly stupid insect right before crushing it. I swallowed hard, my mouth completely dry, and managed to croak out just 3 words, "It's you." Victoria finally spoke for the first time, her lips curving into a slow, cold smile that was more chilling than the winter air outside. "I believe that's my line, actually," she said quietly, but her voice pierced my ears like a shard of ice. "Well played, Mr. Cross. Very well played indeed." She glided toward me with predatory grace, her heels sinking silently into the plush carpet, yet she moved with the overwhelming force of an advancing army. Taking advantage of a crisis situation and turning it to your benefit. You've really elevated opportunism to an art form. She looked me up and down slowly, her gaze analytical and cold, as if scanning a defective product for flaws. "What's the matter? Can't beat me in the boardroom, so you decided to crash my wedding instead? Did you actually think that by marrying me, you'd somehow get a piece of Summit Enterprises handed to you?" A hot flush of genuine anger shot through my entire body. "That's complete bullshit," I hissed through clenched teeth. "If I had known for 1 second that the bride was you, I would have jumped off the roof of this hotel before saying a single word." "Oh really?" She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow with obvious skepticism. "You make it sound like such a terrible hardship, Saint Adrian, swooping in to save the day." "Victoria, don't you dare twist this situation," I shot back, my voice rising. "If I hadn't stepped up when I did, your entire family's name and reputation would be mud right now. You know that's true. And I should thank you for that." Her smile grew even colder, more cutting. "Thank you for turning me from one kind of joke into an even bigger one. From the pathetic bride who got left at the altar to the desperate woman who grabbed some random guest to marry her. Adrian, your particular brand of charity is proving to be very, very expensive for me." Her words shut me up completely, like a slap across the face. I looked at her face, which absolutely screamed, "You are the world's biggest idiot," and replayed the entire day's events in my mind with horrible new clarity. I wasn't a hero at all. I wasn't saving anyone. I was just an impulsive fool who had leaped headfirst into a pit of quicksand and then handed his worst enemy the shovel to bury him with. So there we stood, Victoria Sterling and I, 2 people who had spent years gladly ruining each other in business, standing in a rose-petal-strewn honeymoon suite, dressed in wedding attire, mentally tearing each other to shreds. The air wasn't thick with romance or passion. It was charged with the hostile energy of a cutthroat contract negotiation. After a 3-minute standoff of silent glaring, I finally caved. Not because I was scared of her, but because I felt like if I stood there any longer, my own fury might actually set my rental tuxedo on fire. "Fine," I breathed out, trying desperately to keep my voice steady and controlled. "What's done is done. Pointing fingers and assigning blame is useless at this point. Let's talk about practical solutions like adults." True to her reputation, she switched into pure business mode instantly, her expression becoming neutral and professional. "Agreed," she said crisply. She walked purposefully to the mini bar, poured herself a glass of water with brisk, efficient movements that spoke of someone used to being in complete control. "My terms are quite simple, actually. First, to the outside world, we are a legitimately married couple. No exceptions, no slip-ups." "Why?" I asked, genuinely confused. "We could just tell people it was a temporary arrangement and get it annulled quietly in a few weeks." Problem solved. She looked at me like I was a particularly slow toddler struggling with basic concepts. Adrian, you run a company. Do you have any concept whatsoever of crisis management and public relations? I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I was just publicly humiliated in front of Chicago's entire business community, she said with forced patience. Summit stock is going to tank the absolute second the market opens Monday morning. If news gets out on top of everything else that this was a sham wedding, a complete farce, it becomes a scandal of truly epic proportions. The short sellers will have an absolute field day with our stock. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the killing blow. And do you think your precious velocity dynamics will be immune to the fallout? Opportunist who preys on a rival's misfortune, is that really the reputation you want following you for the rest of your career? I went completely quiet. She was absolutely right, and I hated it. Second, she continued with ruthless efficiency, this marriage needs to last for a minimum of 6 months. After that period, once the market and gossip have moved on to other scandals, we can file for divorce quietly, citing irreconcilable differences. During those 6 months, you will be required to accompany me to all necessary family functions, corporate events, and public appearances. We will maintain the illusion perfectly. What's in it for me? I blurted out, pure business instinct taking over. Why should I agree to this? She actually scoffed, a harsh sound. For starters, I won't leak to the press that Adrian Cross, the celebrated founder of Velocity Dynamics, is a reckless fool who acts without thinking and makes impulsive decisions. Is that incentive enough for you? Touché. She had me completely cornered. Third, she held up a third manicured finger, her eyes sharp as razors. For these 6 months, we are business partners in this marriage arrangement, but we remain complete business rivals in every other way. All competition between our companies continues exactly as usual. No special treatment, no insider information, no mercy. What happens in the boardroom stays in the boardroom and doesn't affect this arrangement. That was going to be my next point, I said, nodding firmly. That's my bottom line. I won't compromise my company. And finally, she set down her glass with a decisive click and walked to the center of the massive room. Using the pointed toe of her designer heel, she traced a clear imaginary line in the thick carpet from the TV console all the way to the floor-to-ceiling windows. This is the boundary line, she declared, her tone absolutely final and non-negotiable. The sofa and the guest bathroom are your territory. The bed and the master bathroom are mine. We do not cross this line. We do not interfere in each other's personal affairs or space. Any objections? I stared in disbelief at the massive, plush, circular bed that could comfortably sleep an entire family of 4. Then I looked at the stylish but distinctly unforgiving-looking designer sofa where I'd be lucky to lie down without my feet hanging off the edge. A protest rose immediately in my throat. Wait, I was the hero today, wasn't I? And I get the uncomfortable couch. You were the hero, not the king, she said flatly, without a trace of sympathy. Of course, you're completely free to walk out that door right now and explain to my father that you've had a sudden change of heart. I'm sure he'd be very understanding, right before he has you destroyed professionally. I surrendered completely, recognizing defeat. I looked at her. She looked right back at me. And in each other's eyes, we saw exactly the same thing, frustration, resignation, and a tiny, ridiculous spark of humor at the complete absurdity of this entire situation. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. But I get to shower first. Deal, she nodded once, businesslike. I need to take off this makeup anyway. It's been a very long day. And so it was that on our wedding night, my new bride and I, instead of romance and passion, drafted a cold, efficient verbal non-aggression pact, like two CEOs finalizing a hostile merger. Once the terms were firmly set, I trudged over to my new territory, that godforsaken sofa that would be my bed. As I passed close to the circular bed, I caught the sweet scent of the scattered rose petals. Only one thought crossed my mind: this is probably the closest I'll ever get to a $100,000 mattress, and I'm not allowed to sleep on it. I woke up the next morning wedged uncomfortably in a crevice of the sofa, absolutely freezing. The hotel's industrial AC was blasting like they owned the electric company and wanted to prove it. I'd used my suit jacket as a makeshift blanket, which had provided exactly zero warmth. When I finally forced my eyes open, Victoria was already awake and dressed, sitting at the vanity table applying something ridiculously expensive to her face. She was wearing a crisp white power suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was the Ice Queen again, fully armed and dangerous. She caught my reflection in the vanity mirror. "You're awake. Good. We need to be downstairs in exactly 10 minutes. Our parents are waiting for us for breakfast." The word "our" coming from her mouth made my skin crawl uncomfortably. "Could you please not say it like that?" I grumbled, trying desperately to work the painful kinks out of my back. "It's incredibly creepy." "It's called getting into character, Mr. Cross," she shot back without missing a beat, turning to face me with a perfectly manufactured smile that didn't reach her eyes. "From this moment on, I am your gentle, loving wife, and you are my devoted, adoring husband. Have you already forgotten the terms of our agreement?" I looked at her cold, businesslike expression and swallowed all my complaints. No point arguing about it. 10 minutes later, we walked into the hotel's elegant restaurant arm in arm, both plastered with sickeningly sweet smiles that felt completely unnatural. Both our families were already seated at a large table, waiting. My parents looked like they were still recovering from the shock of yesterday's events, their eyes filled with a strange mix of pride and confusion. Our son married a Sterling. Mr. Sterling looked 100 times better than yesterday, absolutely beaming at us with genuine happiness. Victoria's mother held her daughter's hand tightly, examining me with the critical, analytical eye of a new mother-in-law sizing up whether I was good enough. "Adrian, come sit here, son," Mr. Sterling said warmly, patting the empty chair directly next to him. My scalp tingled with nervous energy as I sat down carefully. "Did you two sleep well?" my mom asked, her tone a careful mix of nosiness and fear of overstepping boundaries into too personal territory. Before I could formulate any kind of answer, Victoria leaned in gracefully, her voice suddenly taking on a syrupy sweet tone I had absolutely never heard from her before. "We slept wonderfully, Mom. Adrian is such a perfect gentleman." As she spoke those practiced words, she picked up a piece of crispy bacon with silver tongs and placed it delicately on my plate, giving me a subtle wink that only I could see. Her eyes screamed a clear message: play along or else. The hairs on my arms stood straight up, but I immediately grabbed the serving tongs myself. I served her a perfect piece of French toast and said in an equally nauseating voice, "You're too thin, honey. You really need to eat more. Take care of yourself." The word honey tasted like absolute poison in my mouth, foreign and wrong. Victoria's body tensed visibly for a fraction of a second, but her practiced smile never wavered even slightly. "Thank you so much, darling. You're always so thoughtful." And so began the most epic performance of our lives, right there at the breakfast table in front of our unsuspecting parents. We put on an absolute masterclass of fake affection that would have won awards. I'd pour her orange juice without being asked. She'd gently wipe away a non-existent crumb from my lip with her napkin. She'd praise my decisive nature. I'd compliment her grace under extreme pressure. By the end of the elaborate meal, we were almost starting to believe our own carefully constructed act. Our four parents watched with varying expressions, shifting gradually from worried to relieved to slightly confused. They probably thought our relationship had progressed at a slightly unrealistic pace, but they seemed willing to accept it. After breakfast finally ended, Mr. Sterling pulled me aside privately into a quiet corner. He reached into his jacket and handed me something, a credit card. Not just any credit card, but a distinctive black one that caught the light. "Adrian," he said seriously, "this is a little something from the Sterling family. It has a credit limit of $100 million. Consider it a token of our deepest gratitude. Yesterday, you saved us from utter humiliation and scandal. It's a debt we can never truly repay, no matter what we do." I stared at the card in absolute shock, my hand actually trembling. $100 million. A little something. My entire company's valuation wasn't even that high. My first instinct was to refuse immediately. I might have been an impulsive idiot, but I wasn't a grifter or a con artist. But before I could open my mouth to decline, Mr. Sterling continued, his voice growing heavy with emotion. "Please, don't say no. This isn't just a simple thank you. That bastard Marcus left a massive financial hole in our company with his sudden departure. Victoria, she's under absolutely immense pressure right now, more than you can imagine. I need you to be there for her, to protect her, even if you two down the line." He trailed off meaningfully, but I understood perfectly what he meant. I looked at the old man who had clearly aged 10 years in a single day, and the word no died completely on my lips. I took the card carefully. "Don't worry, Dad," I heard myself say, the word feeling strange. "Victoria is my wife now. I won't let anyone hurt her. You have my word." As those words left my mouth, I felt a strange, confusing mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of it was definitely the act, the role I was playing for appearances. But another part, a part one didn't want to examine too closely, felt surprisingly real and genuine. The news that I had married Victoria Sterling hit our industry like an absolute bombshell. Adrian Cross of Velocity Dynamics and Victoria Sterling of Summit Enterprises, two fierce rivals whose public encounters at conferences could literally lower the room temperature by 20 degrees, were married. The initial reaction across the industry was complete disbelief. It's a publicity stunt. It has to be fake. Then photos from the actual wedding started leaking onto social media and industry blogs. The groom was definitely different from the original, but the venue, the guests, the entire Sterling family in attendance, it was all completely real and verified. The narrative shifted rapidly. Is this a corporate merger? Are they trying to create a monopoly? No way, this is real. I heard the original groom bailed at the last second, and Cross was just in the right place at the right time. It's obviously a marriage of convenience. The game's the 1% play, am I right? My phone exploded with an endless stream of calls from business partners, investors, curious friends, and even a few reporters, all fishing desperately for information and the real story. My standard reply to everyone: we fell in love. It was a whirlwind romance. These things happen. Every single time I typed those words, I felt like a complete fraud. Victoria apparently had it just as bad. I heard through the grapevine that Summit's PR department was in full-blown crisis mode, working around the clock to control the narrative. The real test of our arrangement, however, came at our first major public appearance as a married couple. The place was the massive Javits Center, hosting the annual Smart City Tech Conference, one of the industry's biggest events. Victoria and I were both there representing our respective companies, both bidding competitively for the exact same 9-figure city contract. When I arrived fashionably late, she was already there, schmoozing effortlessly with several industry heavyweights and venture capitalists. She wore a deep blue tailored suit that made her look sharp, powerful, and frustratingly attractive. She saw me enter and offered a small, calculated smile. To everyone else in the room, it appeared to be a wife's warm greeting. To me, it was an unmistakable declaration of war. I walked over confidently, slid my arm around her slim waist in what looked like an affectionate gesture, and whispered directly into her ear, looking sharp, "Mrs. Cross. I guess that uncomfortable couch agrees with you after all." That's right. After that first terrible night, I'd thrown the $100 million card dramatically on her pristine white bedspread. In exchange for access to that financial resource, I had successfully negotiated for half of the massive bed. We still maintained a pillow barrier down the middle like teenagers, our own little Berlin Wall, but it was definitely a victory. Her body stiffened noticeably at my words, then her smile widened as she reached up gracefully to straighten my tie with practiced fingers. "Of course, darling," she purred sweetly. Unlike certain people who snore so incredibly loudly they disrupt my beauty sleep every single night. I frowned, genuinely offended. "I don't snore." "I say you do, therefore you do," she replied with false sweetness. "Right, darling." The last word was delivered like a stiletto heel to the chest, a clear threat. The executives standing around us chuckled good-naturedly at our exchange. "Ah, newlyweds. Don't mind us old folks. You two are adorable." I was smiling on the outside, but my insides were churning with frustration. I gave her waist a subtle warning squeeze. In immediate response, her perfectly manicured fingernail accidentally scraped the sensitive side of my neck as she adjusted my tie. In full view of everyone watching, we were engaged in a silent, petty war, hidden completely under the guise of affection. The bidding presentations began promptly at 10. Summit was scheduled first. The absolute second Victoria stepped confidently onto that stage, she transformed completely. The fake Mrs. Cross mask fell away instantly, revealing the ruthless Ice Queen I knew all too well. Her presentation was absolutely flawless. Her data was impeccable and airtight. Her arguments were sharp and logical. She was utterly brilliant. Sitting in the audience, watching her dominate that stage, I had to admit a truth I'd never say out loud. Personal feelings aside, the woman was a phenomenal adversary and genuinely talented. Then it was my turn. I took a deep, steadying breath and walked confidently onto the stage under the bright lights. My proposal approached the same problem from a completely different angle. She had focused on infrastructure and scale, the big picture. I focused instead on user experience and sustainable operations, which was Velocity Dynamics' signature strength. I was completely in the zone, riding the flow. The judges were nodding approvingly, taking notes. Everything was going absolutely perfectly. And then, just as I reached the most critical slide, the detailed cost analysis that would make or break the entire pitch, the massive screen behind me went completely black. My entire presentation vanished. A murmur of surprise rippled through the packed crowd. My stomach dropped sickeningly. I instinctively glanced at Victoria sitting in the front row. She looked genuinely surprised, but there was also an unmistakable glint of dark amusement in her eyes. Let's see you get out of this one, kind of look. Did she somehow do this? Sabotage my presentation? No, this was far too clumsy and obvious for her sophisticated methods. But it didn't matter who was responsible. I had about 10 seconds to salvage this entire situation before losing everything. No slides meant no data, no visuals, no safety net whatsoever. My mind raced frantically through options. Then I made a split-second decision. I deliberately turned off the teleprompter, tossed the remote clicker casually onto the lectern, and walked to the very edge of the stage, closer to the audience. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I said with a relaxed smile and a self-deprecating shrug, it seems my presentation was so dazzling that it short-circuited the entire system. A few scattered chuckles from the audience broke the tension immediately. But that's completely okay, I continued with growing confidence, because a truly great idea shouldn't just live trapped in a PowerPoint presentation. It should live in here, I said, tapping my head. And in here, I added, tapping my chest over my heart. So for the next 10 minutes, allow me to paint you a vivid picture of the smart city that Velocity Dynamics wants to build with you. I went completely off script, freed from the constraints of the slides. My pitch became more passionate, more human, more real. I described in detail an elderly woman using a simple smart bracelet to call for help after falling. I talked about kids playing safely in a park where the lighting and security systems adjusted dynamically to keep them protected. I painted a picture of exhausted commuters using a citywide app to find the fastest, least congested routes home to their families. I wasn't selling technology and features anymore. I was selling a genuinely better life for real people. When I finally finished, the room was silent for one long beat. Then the applause erupted, absolutely thunderous. As I walked off stage, riding the adrenaline high, I passed directly by Victoria. Her expression was complex, unreadable, a mix of professional respect, personal irritation, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Cross," she said quietly, almost under her breath. "Not bad. Not bad at all." Coming from her, those words felt more jarring than 100 cutting insults ever could. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever given me. The winner of the massive contract would be announced in 3 days. Victoria and I had a silent, unspoken agreement not to discuss it or let it affect our fragile truce. Our strange domestic life resumed its separate but equal routine, with the pillow barrier firmly in place between us on the bed. That night, I was heading home late from the Velocity Dynamics office, buried in emails about the bid, when I spotted a familiar, utterly disgusting figure lurking by the entrance to our luxury apartment building. Marcus Blackwell, the runaway groom himself. He was dressed in his signature flashy designer clothes that screamed, trying too hard, holding a giant bouquet of tacky red roses, and blocking Victoria's path as she tried to get past him into the lobby. "Victoria, just let me explain," he pleaded desperately, his voice oozing fake sincerity that made my skin crawl. I had a good reason, I swear. She stood rigid, her face a perfect mask of cold fury. "Get out of my way, Marcus. Now. Give me another chance," he begged, stepping closer. "What's that Cross guy got that I don't? He's just the schmuck who picked up the scraps after I left. Our history, everything we had together, does that mean nothing to you?" Hearing him dismiss me as scraps was one thing, I could live with that. But the way he talked about Victoria like she was some prize to be fought over, some object he owned, lit a protective fuse inside me that burned hot and fast. She snapped, "No. Are you deaf? Move." They both whipped around at the sound of my footsteps. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into a sneering glare. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Cross, keeping a tight leash on your hand-me-down wife." I ignored him completely, stepped in front of Victoria to shield her physically, and looked down at Marcus like he was something foul I'd just scraped off my shoe. "First," I said, my voice dangerously calm and controlled, "she is my legal wife. Mrs. Cross. You will address her with respect, or not at all. Second," I continued, leaning in slightly, "I don't care what your so-called reasons were. A man who humiliates a woman and her entire family on their wedding day doesn't get to talk about history or second chances. And third," I took a deliberate step closer, using my full height to loom over him menacingly, "I don't know what your pathetic game is, and I don't care. But you're going to leave right now, or I will personally introduce you to the concept of unavoidable personal matters in ways you'll never forget." My stare was cold steel, honed from years of dealing with entitled pricks in boardrooms and business deals. Marcus was just another one in a long line. He flinched visibly, clearly not expecting that schmuck to have any backbone whatsoever. You just wait," he stammered weakly, pointing a trembling finger at me. He shot a final nasty look at Victoria. "This isn't over, Vic, don't forget, I still have leverage." With that pathetic threat hanging in the air, he threw the roses onto the ground in a dramatic flourish, jumped into his low-slung sports car, and sped off into the night with tires screeching. The street fell quiet again, the tension lingering like smoke. I turned to Victoria, who was pale, her full lips pressed into a thin, hard line. "What did he mean by leverage?" I asked directly, concern cutting through my anger. Her head snapped up, her eyes suddenly guarded and defensive. "It has nothing to do with you, Adrian. I am your legal husband," I repeated firmly, not backing down. "His threat against you is a threat against me. This isn't a business negotiation anymore, Victoria. This isn't the time for us to play rivals." She was silent for a long, heavy moment, staring at the scattered roses on the pavement. Finally, she spoke, her voice weary and stripped of its usual armor. "Some old photos and videos from years ago. Nothing truly scandalous, but if he released them now, it would be a complete mess for the family and Summit." I got it immediately. Blackmail. Classic revenge play. I looked at her, this woman who was always so composed, so fiercely independent and unbreakable, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real vulnerability, actual helplessness in her eyes. Something deep inside me shifted permanently. "Come on," I said softly, my voice losing its edge. I took her slender wrist gently in my hand. "Let's go home." Her wrist felt thin and cool in my grip. She didn't pull away. She just nodded once and followed me inside. Back in our apartment, the mood hung heavy like a storm cloud. Victoria disappeared into the bathroom to wash her face while I rummaged through the wine rack and found a decent bottle of Cabernet along with 2 glasses. "Here," I said, sliding a full glass toward her across the Marble Island counter as she emerged. She looked at me searchingly, then took it and downed a large gulp in one go. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly, staring into the dark red liquid swirling in her glass. "Why did you help me back there?" "Like I said," I replied, leaning casually against the counter, "we're a team now, whether we like it or not. He embarrasses you, he embarrasses me by association. And I hate being embarrassed." "Is that the only reason?" she pressed, her eyes meeting mine directly for the first time that night. "What other reason would there be?" I shot back lightly, masking the truth. "You don't think I'm actually falling for you, do you? Don't be ridiculous, Sterling. We're still enemies at heart." She didn't answer, just took another slow sip of wine, but the tension between us eased slightly. That night, we didn't talk about work, or Marcus, or the contract bid, or any of the heavy important things weighing us down. We just drank. Wine, it turns out, is a remarkably effective solvent for even the thickest emotional armor. Victoria's tolerance for alcohol was nowhere near as impressive as her business acumen. After a few generous glasses, her cheeks flushed pink, her sharp eyes lost their laser focus, and she started opening up in ways I'd never imagined. She talked about her uncle who always sneered that a woman could never truly run the family business. She vented about the old guard at Summit who constantly undermined her at every turn. She confessed about Marcus, how she'd suspected something was off for months but endured it anyway for the sake of a strategic family alliance, only to be betrayed in the most public, humiliating way possible. "Everyone thinks I'm made of steel," she murmured softly, tracing the rim of her glass with a fingertip, her voice thick with emotion. "But I get tired, Adrian. I get scared sometimes. My dad put the entire future of the company squarely on my shoulders. I can't fail. I can't afford to lose. Not even once." And then she started to cry. Not the loud, hysterical sobs of a breakdown, but silent, dignified tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the marble countertop. Each drop landed like a weight on my chest. This was a side of her I'd never seen, never even suspected existed. Not the cutthroat negotiator who'd stolen my deals, not the dazzling executive who dominated boardrooms, just a young woman who'd been deeply hurt, carrying the weight of the world alone, desperately trying not to crack under the pressure. I was completely out of my element. Crying women had always been my kryptonite. I grabbed a paper towel from the dispenser and held it out to her awkwardly. She didn't take it. Instead, she looked up at me with shimmering eyes and asked the question that stopped me cold, "Adrian, do you hate me?" The question hit like a punch. Did I hate her? I used to, absolutely. She'd stolen contracts, poached my best engineer, derailed my growth plans. I'd fantasized about all sorts of petty revenge. But now, seeing her with all defenses down, face streaked with tears, the word hate felt completely wrong, foreign. "No," I heard myself say, my voice coming out raspy and honest. "I don't hate you. You're just a massive pain in the ass most days." She let out a wet, choked laugh, a mix of tears and genuine amusement that transformed her face. "You're not exactly a picnic yourself," she sniffled, wiping her eyes finally. She kept drinking until she passed out cold on the couch. I was the one who carried her to bed. She was surprisingly light in my arms, vulnerable in a way that twisted something inside me. I pulled the covers over her carefully and stood there for a long time, just watching her sleeping face, her long lashes still damp, her breathing steady and soft. That imaginary boundary line we'd drawn down the middle of our bed, our lives, our fake marriage, it felt like it had been washed away completely by the events of that night. The next morning, Victoria acted like absolutely nothing had happened. She was the Ice Queen again, crisp in her power suit, though she couldn't quite meet my eyes directly over coffee. I didn't bring it up or push. Some moments are better left unsaid, allowed to simmer quietly. The results of the Smart City bid came in that afternoon. Velocity Dynamics won. When the official call came through, I didn't feel the expected rush of triumphant victory. My first thought was of Victoria, alone in her office across the city. Would she see this as betrayal? As me exploiting her vulnerability the night before? But she stayed silent, no angry calls, no passive-aggressive texts, no retaliation. It was an unnerving, echoing quiet that spoke volumes. Then, on Friday morning, disaster struck. Summit Enterprises' stock began plummeting without warning. It dropped a brutal 8% in the first hour of trading alone. I had my assistant dig into the cause immediately. The news came back fast and ugly. Marcus Blackwell had leaked a forged internal report online, predicting massive quarterly losses for Summit tied to a non-existent failed overseas venture. At the exact same time, he'd partnered with shady hedge funds to aggressively short the stock. It was pure, vicious revenge, and it was designed to be lethal, to destroy everything her family had built. My office phone rang mid-chaos. It was Victoria. Her voice was steady as steel, but I could hear the bone-deep exhaustion underneath. "Adrian, are you free tonight? I need you to play a part. Make it convincing." "Send me the address," I said without hesitation, no questions asked. We were in this together now. That night, at an exclusive private club downtown pulsing with power, Victoria led me into a dimly lit private dining room. Inside, a group of smug, middle-aged men, powerful investors with bottomless wallets, sat around a polished mahogany table like vultures. Marcus lounged at the head like a petty king, grinning ear to ear when he saw us enter. Well, Victoria," he drawled smugly. "Come to beg for mercy. And you brought your little lapdog husband too." Victoria ignored him completely, her gaze sweeping over the other men like a general assessing troops. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice ringing with unshakable authority, "I'm here tonight to make one thing crystal clear. That so-called financial report you've all seen circulating online. It's a complete forgery. Fabricated garbage. A fake." One investor chuckled skeptically, leaning back. "That's a bold claim, Victoria. We've got real money riding on this. Which is exactly why I brought proof." She pulled a thick file from her sleek briefcase and slapped it onto the table with a resounding thud. "This is a signed strategic partnership agreement between Summit Enterprises and Velocity Dynamics. My husband's company will be investing $500 million in Summit in exchange for an equity stake. Together, we'll jointly develop the entire Smart City project." She turned to me smoothly, extending her hand, her eyes filled with a level of trust that stunned me speechless. "Isn't that right, darling?" I got it instantly, falling into step without missing a beat. I stepped forward, took her hand firmly in mine, and faced the room of stunned investors with a confident, unbreakable smile. "That's absolutely right," I confirmed, holding our joined hands high for emphasis. "I didn't just marry Victoria Sterling. I'm investing in her vision, and in the future of Summit Enterprises. This $500 million is just the beginning of what we'll build together." I paused for effect, letting it sink in. "So if you're thinking of shorting Summit stock, you're not just betting against her. You're betting against both of us, against the team that just won the city's biggest tech contract. I'd suggest you think very, very carefully before making that mistake." The color drained from Marcus's smug face like water down a drain. One wounded giant like Summit they might take down through dirty tricks. But Summit backed by the fresh contract winner? That was an entirely different beast, unbeatable. That night, we were a perfect, unstoppable team. She was the unyielding steel spine. I was the decisive hammer blow. We didn't need to make overt threats, our rock-solid unity was threat enough. One by one, the investors made polite excuses and slipped away, their confidence shattered. Soon, it was just us and Marcus, alone in the tense room. "You're ruthless, Victoria," he spat, standing up shakily. "You'd actually team up with him just to beat me? After everything?" "You underestimated me," she replied coldly, her voice like Arctic wind. "And you severely underestimated my husband." The way she said "my husband," it didn't sound fake anymore. It sounded real. Proud. Possessive. On the drive home through the glittering city lights, the car hummed with comfortable silence. "Thank you," Victoria said softly, breaking it first, her profile illuminated by passing street lamps. "For what, exactly?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "For backing my play completely. That agreement, it wasn't real. The $500 million, I made it all up on the spot to call their bluff." I smiled faintly, not surprised. "I know. Your poker face isn't quite as flawless as your PowerPoint skills." She turned to me, genuinely shocked. "You knew? How?" "When you're bluffing under pressure, you have a tell," I explained casually. "You tap your index finger lightly against your thumb. You did it the second you slapped that fake file on the table." She was speechless for a long beat, then burst into real laughter, the kind that lit up her entire face. "You're dangerous, Cross." "But," I added, turning serious, "just because the agreement was fake doesn't mean the partnership has to be. That Smart City project is massive, too big for Velocity to handle alone without stretching thin. Instead of letting some outsider grab a piece of the pie, why don't we keep all the money and glory in the family?" She stared at me for a long, assessing moment as the city blurred by. Then she smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes and melted every trace of ice. "Okay, partner," she said, her voice warm. "Let's do it. For real this time." After that pivotal night, everything between us transformed completely. We launched the official joint venture, combining the best engineers, minds, and resources from both Velocity Dynamics and Summit Enterprises. Our days filled with heated, passionate arguments in glass-walled conference rooms, followed by late nights where we'd hammer out brilliant solutions over takeout and coffee, laughing at our own stubbornness. The business world watched in awe as rivals became allies, dominating the industry together. Marcus's schemes crumbled, his leverage mysteriously disappeared after a quiet word from Mr. Sterling's lawyers. Our families grew closer, thrilled by the fairy tale union that saved face and fortunes. And privately, the pillow barrier vanished one night without discussion. What started as a farce wedding born of lobster and impulse evolved into something profound, a partnership of equals, forged in fire, built on mutual respect, fierce loyalty, and an unexpected, all-consuming love that neither of us saw coming but both of us fought for with everything we had. In the end, the men who came for the lobster stayed for the lifetime, and discovered the greatest deal of his life wasn't in any boardroom.